Yeah, okay, so what I'm seeing them say is...
Chair Du Bois.
Present.
Councilmember Filseth. Councilmember Fine. Mayor Scharf. 4 present.
Okay, so this is the Rail Committee meeting for June 7th. First up's oral communications. We have one speaker, Richard Brandt.
Good morning, everybody. Richard Brandt, 281 Addison. And I'd just like to speak out about our last meeting in April of this committee. I was rather amazed when the director, Northern California High-Speed Rail Program, admitted to us that two of their 3 options bring 4 tracks into Palo Alto from the north. One of them as far as down as Cal Avenue. And I think this is I urge you to take an action to take this to council, because I think that the city and residents of the city, many of them, if not all of them, most of them don't know this. And I didn't want to bring this up at the workshop. I thought that was an important workshop to have, but I think this is something that needs to be addressed. We need to get more information from high-speed rail people on 4 tracks. That's going to be a major blow to residents living along the right-of-way in the northern part of the city. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Okay. Second speaker, Nadia Nayak.
Hi, good morning. So I just wanted to report that and I'm sure Josh will probably say it, but that the VTA guidelines have the decisions for the exact language has been pushed to their August meeting. That gives us time to fix the language, because you will want to fix the language, because it currently says that they will fund the cheapest alternative, and clearly we would have beef with that sort of language. It doesn't, we're entitled to our piece of the money. They shouldn't really decide whether our alternative is the cheapest or not, and cheapest is relative, cheaper to what, yada, yada. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, the Caltrain business plan is a topic that's come up. Their next meeting is July 6th, where they're going to be discussing this. One of the things that we at Friends of Caltrain, I'm wearing that hat right now, have been encouraging cities is that Palo Alto really needs to think about this Caltrain as an asset that we pay for. So what do you want out of that asset? So any communications that we as a city can give to Caltrain that tells them what kind of short, medium, and long-term goals we expect as they continue to invest in the corridor and improve their service would be great stuff that they could include in their business plan going forward. So it's great that they're doing a business plan, but there's probably more stuff that we could talk about in those things. And then lastly is, I think that's it for now. I'll put the other ones on the other items. Sure. Thank you.
Is this another oral communication?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the last speaker, Roland.
So, thank you. So, very briefly, I want to segue on to what the first speaker said, is that in the South, we basically are where Bakersfield were. Okay. I don't think anybody is really talking about suing them just yet, but we're definitely talking about coming up with our own alternatives down there. So in Bakersfield, it was called an LGA, a locally generated alternative. But it's more serious than that. It's becoming really apparent that these people, actually all you have to do is to get onto LinkedIn and look at their bios. None of these people have ever had any kind of experience designing a high-speed line. So it's not necessarily a problem in the peninsula, because it's not a real high-speed line. This is a serious problem in the South. And recent developments is that Parsons Brinkerhoff, which no longer exists now, I think it's called WSP USA. When they got this $7 million RDP contract, mentioned a bunch of projects in UK, including Crossrail and High Speed 2, they've actually been terminated from both projects. They had very, very small contracts, and in English, it's called not retained. So I'll just leave that with you, but my recommendation to the board is basically to terminate these people and either issue another RFP or actually grant a contract to the other company who were eminently qualified. They're the people who did the Channel Tunnel rail link, and currently are the program managers for High Speed 2. And we're also the program managers for Crossrail, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're moving on to item number 1, which is review and update on the rail program.
Great. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Josh Mello, the city's Chief Transportation Official. Included in your packet is a briefing paper that was prepared for the previous date of the scheduled rail committee. It has not been updated in the past couple weeks. You'll be provided information on what's transpired in the last couple weeks at the following rail committee meeting. In your briefing packet, there's an overview of the community workshop, which occurred on May 20th. We'll go into further details on that later in the agenda. There's also a list of folks that we have reached out tentatively to invite to our technical advisory committee. We have received some confirmations that some of these folks will be able to participate in our technical advisory committee. We have not convened that committee yet. We'll talk about the plan for that committee with you in the coming meetings. There's also a brief discussion on the center OCS pole design. Chair Du Bois asked us to look into the pole design in Atherton, and there's a rep from Caltrain today who will be presenting and can answer a lot more of these questions. But our current understanding is that as it's a design-build contract, there are certain parameters and mitigation measures that the design-build contractor is required to follow. This includes preservation of existing vegetation where feasible. In some cases, it's feasible to install center OCS poles if there's adequate width between the tracks. In Atherton's case, there's a lot more width between the tracks through most of Atherton than there is in Palo Alto, so there are some opportunities to install center OCS poles in Atherton. There may not be the same opportunities in Palo Alto. And there's some detailed drawings of the different pole types at the back of the briefing packet. And then lastly, the packet includes a look ahead for the rail committee. This is a tentative list of what we propose to place on the agenda for the rail committee over the next year. And finally, there's the consultant expenditures to date report on the last page of the main briefing packet, and then it's followed with drawings of some of the OCS pole designs. That concludes this presentation.
So I think some of these items are on the agenda today, so I think we should probably discuss the poles and trees in the next item. So are there any comments on other items in this update? Questions?
So you're going to discuss that OCS pole design on this item or the next one?
And on the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we did have one speaker
Same thing.
on the next item?
Next-
Okay.
do it next time.
Thank you. I mean, I do have one comment. I think on the Technical Advisory Committee, I think we really should include Pat Burt. I mean, he is highly knowledgeable about rail. He's been the city's regional representative for a long time.
I don't.
Yeah. Well, so we didn't, I mean, the committee did not pick these members, and I don't think we want to, but again, I just think it's, an incredible oversight. So,
I think it makes it too political and then a non-political technical advisory group. I said I don't. I think Pat's very political, and I don't think we should make it political.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Sure, I mean, he's been an elected official, so he's political, but I think on the rail side, he's just, incredibly knowledgeable, has a lot of facts about the situation. So I guess I'd make a motion to add Pat to the Technical Advisory Committee.
So it's on the floor. I guess you guys should speak to it.
Sorry?
You just got your second. I was going to ask some questions.
Well, go ahead.
Does staff want us to make motions and going and choosing and voting people in or out of the TAC?
You speak a little more directly to the role of the TAC?
So currently the TAC is strictly agency representatives who serve in a technical capacity with their respective agencies. And the role would be to, help us work through the alternatives and some of the analysis from a technical perspective.
Thank you. So I would be willing to support adding certain groups here, whether it's things like Transform or maybe a member of our PTC, if that's helpful to staff. I completely agree. Former Mayor Burt is an expert on this, and I hope he continues to contribute. But I don't really see our role as just picking people out and throwing them on this committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should leave this up to staff. We tend to leave stuff up to staff like this when we get involved, especially on a technical advisory committee, and especially since it's agency representatives. I think it would be inappropriate to add someone who's basically political.
Any other comments? Okay.
I second it for discussion.
Okay. Well, I guess later today we're talking about the feedback from the workshop and other types of representatives. Okay. So let's go ahead and vote on the motion. Who's for? Okay. Against? All right. So. Any other comments on this update? We also have further future agendas as an item, so maybe we should come back to that one as well.
You mean the schedule? Come back to it at the end?
Well, I guess the Rail Committee agenda look ahead on page 5. Okay, let's move on to item number 2.
Thank you. With me to my left is Lori Lowe. She is with the CalMod program. CalMod includes both the electrification and the new vehicle purchases for Caltrain modernization. And Lori's going to give you a brief overview of the CalMod program and then answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you for having me, Chair and committee members. So I'm Lori Lowe. I'm Government Affairs and Community Affairs with Caltrain and CalMod. So I come today with an update on our electrification project, and we're happy to report that we, in May, received our federal funding or execution of the federal funding grant. And so $73 million have been approved in prior years. $100 million was approved in fiscal year 2017, and then $100 million has been recommended in fiscal year 2018. So the grant was for $647 million. On the EMU, the electric vehicle side of things, we have a website now, calmodtrains.com, which allows for public input and feedback. We'll be having different polls to help make the decisions on the design. We recently had our exterior design poll, and it lasted a week, and the results from that has determined the inspiration and direction of our design for the exterior. And upcoming will be the seat colors, and also the bike design of the onboard bike system for the trains. And that'll be later this summer. On the infrastructure side, the timeline is, well, first I'll say that the EMU contract for Stadler, they got full notice to proceed on June 1st, and we are expecting full notice to proceed with the infrastructure side on June 19th. With Palo Alto, our OCS design review will happen with segment 3, and so I believe you just received a handout of the work segments for the corridor. So we've been progressing through segments 2 and 4 and starting at the northern ends. So South San Francisco in segment 2 and Santa Clara in segment 4. That's how we started, and we're moving through the design review process for that. And so segment 3, which is what Palo Alto is the design is currently at 35%. And when we're happy to share the design of the poles within the JPP right-of-way for informational purposes with the committee and staff, of course. And the design review of the poles at 65%. At the stations, and the color type will be discussed, and we'll be asking for input in early 2018 for Palo Alto. And field construction, we anticipate in Palo Alto to start late summer, early fall, overall. And then we'll be updating our schedule based on the latest NTP schedule, and then we'll get back to CSCG, the staff of the cities, with that information. Does anyone have questions at this point?
We have members of the public, I think, who want to speak, and then we'll come to the committee if that's...
Sure. Okay.
Okay. All right, so right now we have 2 speakers, looks like 3. First speaker is Roland. Okay. Okay, so we'll go with Nadia.
Sorry, thanks.
And then Herb Borak will be second.
So I just had a question. I just received a copy of a letter from Brian Kelly to Caltrain about the electrification funding. So if you could talk, if you could talk a little bit about what that means and what the ramifications are. I just forwarded it to all of you, so we're all just getting it at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, Herb Borak.
Good morning, Chair Du Bois and committee members. Caltrain and the city already knows what the cross-section is of the rail corridor in Palo Alto. It knows how far apart the tracks are and how far the trains are, platforms are from the tracks. So you don't need to have a lot of time spent on spending a design of color or anything else, but you could tell us right now whether we could have central poles or not, or whether we need 2 poles, two poles, or one directly across, because it depends upon the fact that you can't have any of the electrified equipment over the platform itself. So those constraints, I think, are important to know as early as possible. And while the drawings from Atherton are interesting, I would have preferred to have seen on the previous items report just that high-level discussion of what the corridor looks like in Palo Alto to see what's feasible in which types of poles that we be having along the Caltrain corridor within the city of Palo Alto rather than within the town of Atherton. And that's different from the detailed design that you can put off till phase 3 of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker. Roland, how do you pronounce your last name?
It depends. In English, in English or en français?
In French.
Lebrun. But you can call me Roland the Brown too. So, on the center poles, I'm sorry for you, but I've got some bad news. And I explained this to them in the EIR scoping comments, is that you cannot put center poles in the middle of a high-speed line. There's a very specific case when you can have center poles on the high-speed lines. It's when you got the stations and you got 4 tracks. It's after the track split, you can have center poles that serve both the platform and the high-speed line. And the reason you can do that is that you're not going to have 2 trains that are going to be using the wire of the same center pole at the same time. If you put a center pole in the middle of a high-speed line, the issue that you've got, I don't know if you've seen this, you've actually got a 1/4 of a mile long, which is basically as a wavelength going to the wire. That in turn transmits a vibration through the pole, and that vibration in turn affects the wire on the other side. 79 mile an hour thing is not an issue. At 110, at the very minimum, you're going to get some kind of arcing. You're going to have premature pantograph wear, and you're going to have premature wear. In the worst case scenario, you can have a complete catenary failure. I mentioned in scoping comments, the people who did the review for the High-Speed Rail Authority for $600 million picked it up also. They just ignored it. So that's all I'm going to say about that. On the FFGA, that FFGA, they did not qualify for an FFGA because they had to prove a minimum of 10% increase in capacity. Right now, our bullets have got 760 seats. They're running at over 130% of capacity. The MUs have got 550 seats. We're going to lose 200 seats per train. Okay, that should never ever gone through. Their response was they had 3,768 seats per hour, which is like 60 seats increase or whatever, going up to 4,112. I issued a PRA. I say, how do you account for this? The first PRA was non-responsive. I just issued a second PRA. The last point I'd like to mention, and you need to get a copy of this letter, is the letter that Secretary Kelly sent to them that put, 5 significant conditions on the $600 million Prop 1A bonds, which got C-bus. Guess what? They're saying we need to do some curve straightening because we want to 110 miles an hour. So the situation we have got now is that Caltrain is environmentally cleared a 79-mile alignment, and the High Speed Rail Authority are willing to give them $600 million on the condition that they actually, it's not just a question of straightening the tracks, which is basically moving the tracks and everything else to achieve 110 miles an hour, but also have a track configuration that allows them to run high-speed trains as well as at Caltrain. That is not environmentally cleared. So my question to you is, what's going to happen to this electrification? Right now, I don't know. I think this is a good question to ask Caltrain. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any responses to some of the public issues?
Sure. Regarding the capacity question, we are going to have 6 trains running per peak hour per direction instead of the 5 trains now, which also factors into the capacity increase as well as the turnover. So because the EMUs can start and stop and go to more stations within the same amount of time, that also allows for the amount of people going on and off the train to increase. So that also factors into our capacity. As far as the Atherton pole design, having center poles in Atherton was part of like an example used in, I think, the EIR. And again, it is correct that it has to have a certain width in order to do that. And so as we look at Palo Alto and do the design process there, we're going to have to see if there's even that width possibility. So, and for Brian Kelly's letter, I will need to check in about that and see, and I can get back to you with a response.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. So I'll turn to the committee. Anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you. So just a few things, echoing what some of the public has said, it would be really helpful if Caltrain shared early and often what the pole design is. Mm-hmm. And to Mr. Borok's comments, there probably are places where you know what you can't do, mm-hmm. and even if we could see that, that would be helpful in certain sections of the train. And so then just so I can be clear, in terms of the capacity issue, you're just going to more trains with more stops per hour but less seats per train?
The addition of the Bombardier trains mm-hmm. Increased our seat numbers. So when we started the process with the FTA, those weren't included.
You weren't counting those?
But it does. We do increase our capacity by the needed amount.
But I know, but it's occurring by more trains per hour, and the trains maybe smaller sets. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're more nimble. They're more capable of being able to do those stops and starts. So that does allow us to increase the capacity.
Okay, and then, I mean, are those sets expandable in the future, like with the Bombardiers we've done now?
Yes, okay. They are. And for part of CalMod 2.0, we're looking at how can we get to 8-car train sets.
Okay, mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any questions? Fair? No? So, and just following up on Councilmember Fine, I guess why do we have detailed Atherton drawings and not any Palo Alto drawings at this point?
If you look at the diagram here, yep. Atherton is part of the segment 2 piece of work. So this is the progression that they were making with the designs. So they started here, moved down, and started in segment 4 and moved down, and then we will be starting at segment 1 and 3, and then moving down. The design that
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think there's going to be strong community interest in center poles in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of homes near the tracks, probably more than most communities, mm-hmm. and those trees, provide screening in the tracks. What's the required distance in the right-of-way there?
I can get back to you with the required distance.
Is it like 25 feet on each side or something like that?
Yeah, in order to get the safety clearance. But we
thought it was even more than.
Yeah, we.
Okay.
I thought it was in the report somewhere. Yeah.
I think where possible, Caltrain will definitely try to do it. You know, we want to do what's best for the community. We want to make sure that we, protect as many trees as possible, and, that we have as least amount of impact for the community. So where possible, we will try and do it.
I mean, we just did a bunch of clearing to put in, fences along the sides. I guess right here it says 21 feet.
21 feet.
Okay.
Fences are further out than 21 feet.
So, I mean, it would be really great if either staff or Caltrain could give us an estimate of trees, if any additional trees are going to need to be cut down.
We have to do a draft tree plan, and we'll be meeting with the city later this summer to discuss that. And then the actual, either trimming of the trees or removal of trees would happen later in winter 2018. So again, we would be working with the city later in the summer.
And is there any exception process or
In terms,
of that 21 feet?
I think it's a basic safety, like you need to do it in order
So even if you
to
have the
be safe.
center pole, it doesn't change?
I can get back to you on that.
Okay. I mean, I think aesthetics are also going to be a concern, especially through neighborhoods. And then we also have our historic Palo Alto tree that's
Right.
pretty close to the right-of-way. Has there been any?
That'll also be part of the draft tree plan when they assess that situation.
Okay.
Right.
And then my last question is the comment about high-speed rail and center poles. Do you have any additional detail on that?
All of that I can package together in a response. So.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, Adrian?
Just one last thing that struck me. I use a lot of the stations, San Francisco, South San Francisco, San Carlos, Palo Alto, downtown Cal Ave, all these. It'd be really helpful, actually. You guys can leverage your stations to advertise to folks what you're going to do. I mean, when I get on downtown or Cal Ave each morning, there's nothing saying, hey, there's this electrification project happening. CalMod's great. Your guys' social media and communications, I think, are pretty good. But you could just use the stations and let our residents know what's going to be happening there.
Okay. That's great advice. And we're also hoping to bring out like samples of the bike racks and the seats to the stations, but ongoing station outreach would be great.
Thanks. Yeah, and I know I've been focusing on the trees, but we're highly supportive of electrification. We just like to have it be done aesthetically pleasing as possible.
Right. And we thank everybody for all your support and all your efforts to help make this happen. So.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
could I ask a question of Josh? So we have a process between the different jurisdictions and essentially sort of coming to an agreement or sign off or whatever on the electrification project. I mean, I'm just curious where we are on that. And then secondly, don't mean to put you on the spot, but the convenience of having you here. Thank you for being here. There are a number of different issues or problem solving, we're interested in doing as a city also on or near the Caltrain right away. And, just my sense from the city manager sort of seat is, and I may not have all the information, is that a lot of decisions are just sort of held up or in limbo because of the electrification project. And that deals with, Josh can speak to some of those things. So anyway, I thought the committee ought to hear sort of about this process.
Sure. So monthly, there's a CSCG meeting at Caltrain headquarters, and all of the staff from the various jurisdictions along the peninsula are invited to that meeting. We're attending regularly. 1 month is focused around the CalMod project, and then the next month is focused around high-speed rail. It's not a voting body, or it's more of a kind of a review and comment format, but that's been very helpful to get details on the project and help coordinate with other jurisdictions. We've also convened kind of ad hoc meetings and invited folks from peninsula cities down to Palo Alto City Hall to discuss specific particular items, such as the reimbursement agreement from high-speed rail that we were approached regarding last year. So we have an ongoing coordination structure with, our adjacent cities as well as the rest of the peninsula. We have been working on a comprehensive agreement with Caltrain for the PSEP project. and we're negotiating some points of interest in that agreement, which includes some of the things that Jim alluded to around our approval process or review process for design elements of the project, how involved our architectural review board will be on those decisions. There are also a couple connectivity projects, some bike paths, and some other minor improvements that we need cooperation from Caltrain in order to complete. So we're in the middle of negotiating the specifics of that agreement, and we anticipate that that will come to council in August or sometime after the summer. We've marked up a draft recently and sent it back to Caltrain, but that's an ongoing negotiation that's occurring, and they're attempting to execute these agreements with all of the cities along the corridor.
On that point, either Josh or Lori, do you know where the other cities are with respect to their execution of the cooperation agreements?
I believe that 16 have already been executed.
Okay, so we're one of the last, if not the last. That was my understanding. Also, for the committee's information, from the utilities perspective, we're also working through some of the logistics involved with the electrification project that affect our crossing electrical lines. And so there are clearance requirements. We've got a CIP project that's a part of the proposed budget to relocate our crossing lines. So this is obviously a significant construction project. And so as a result, as some of these design issues come into better focus, we'll be bringing that back to the council and the committee for your information and action as needed.
And I guess one of the last comments, we also have several places where we have dedicated park space right against the rail corridor, and we should also look at those locations again for screening. And great. All right. I think that'll conclude this item. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And the last one is a review of the community workshop.
Great, thank you. I have a brief presentation on the workshop. We're going to come back to you with a more in-depth written report on the results of the workshop, but this was assembled relatively quickly after the workshop on May 20th. If you remember, I think it was back in April, early April, late March, you gave us authorization to move forward with stage 1 of the community outreach program for the Connecting Palo Alto Rail program. And stage 1, the first step was to convene this large community workshop. Some other minor work items under this stage are to start to identify the technical advisory committee, which we discussed earlier in this meeting. And the ultimate outcome of this stage is to refine the problem definition and develop some evaluation criteria to help us measure success as we move forward with the context-sensitive solutions, alternatives analysis, and the identification of a preferred alternative. So I want to thank all of you. Many of you were able to come out on May 20th for our Connecting Palo Alto Community Workshop 1. It was at Mitchell Park, a 4-hour event starting at 10 a.m. On a Saturday and running till 2 p.m. that afternoon. On the ramp up to the workshop, we mailed out over 15,000 postcards to any resident or business within a half-mile of the rail corridor. We created a project website, which is the city website / Connecting Palo Alto. We did regular posts on social media, several posts on Nextdoor in the preceding weeks. And we also received some coverage in Palo Alto Weekly and some other online news media, including Patch. One of the other things that we did in the ramp up to the workshop was to conduct stakeholder interviews. So the project team invited selected individuals into Palo Alto City Hall in the downtown library, and we conducted 1-hour interviews with these stakeholders to solicit feedback from them on the process, as well as some of the problems and their ideas for evaluation criteria. The agenda for the workshop was primarily the morning was focused around discussing existing conditions, and then we broke for lunch, and it was a working lunch provided as part of the workshop. And the PM sessions were mainly focused around identification of the current problems along the rail corridor, and then starting to discuss how we would define success ultimately as we move forward into the alternatives identification process. We were very surprised by the attendance. We had 130 attendees. We had assumed anywhere from 100 to 200, so we were impressed that many folks were able to spend 4 hours with us on a Saturday. Again, thank you all for attending. We had 4 elected officials in attendance, as well as staff from various city departments and the project consultant team. We received 40 comments to date as of the preparation of this presentation. A lot of those were forms submitted at the workshop, and then we were very grateful to receive comments via email from people that were not able to attend the workshop as well. So we made it very clear that we were still looking for their input, even if they weren't able to make it out on May 20th. So some of the tools we used, I mentioned the stakeholder interviews that were done prior to the workshop, and we were actually able to shape some of the workshop agenda based on the feedback that we got in these stakeholder interviews. So one key point that came up in multiple interviews was that we weren't talking enough about the previous work that had been done, and folks felt like they dedicated a lot of time to the rail corridor study that was done in 2014. So we were able to carry that forward to the workshop and make sure that we address that. And we're going to continue to highlight that study and pull things from that study that we think are applicable to this context-sensitive solutions alternatives analysis process. At the workshop, we used an innovative real-time polling tool called Meeting Sift, and I'll talk a little bit about the results. That's a way to kind of break the ice with folks at workshops and get them, wake them up a little bit and get them involved. And they can also see, the opinions of others in the room, and it helps to share information. We had 2 breakout sessions that were facilitated by staff at each of the table. And then post-workshop, we posted all the materials on the website. We also have a link to the video, so the entire workshop was video and audio recorded. There's now a link to that audio and video recording on the project website, which again is the city's website /connecting Palo Alto. So some of the results from the Meeting Sift surveys, we asked people which grade crossing they live closest to, and it was fairly evenly split, except for not a lot of folks live near the Palo Alto Avenue crossing, and that's understandable. It's at the far northern end of the city. I think as we move through this process, that's the one that we're going to have to actively solicit opinions on. Not a lot of people have an opinion on that crossing, and not a lot of people are familiar with it as they are with the other grade crossings. So,
can you explain what are the numbers in the pie chart?
Those are the number of people.
Counts. So
Yes.
out of 130 people, we had like less than half that used this, or?
It's a pretty quick survey, so it is that percentages, Michelle, or is that numbers? I'm sorry.
I think it's numbers.
I think it's numbers. So it's a pretty quick survey, and not everybody had smartphones.
Slow on
And
the
we
draw on
had
the
So if you're slow on the draw, or if you don't have an opinion, we're going to close the survey pretty quickly. We also handed out paper copies of the survey. We didn't want to leave people who were not technologically savvy, unable to participate. So we had a paper version that we looked at after the workshop. Question 2, not surprisingly, we asked which existing grade separation do you use the most, and Oregon Expressway was number 1. It's dead center in the middle of Palo Alto. It's it's served by an expressway that moves fairly quickly and reliably, so it's not surprising that a lot of people gravitate towards Oregon Expressway when they want to cross the rail corridor. And then I was a little surprised that San Antonio Avenue was as high as San Antonio Road. It's at the far southern end of the city. People may be using that to access shopping and other destinations across the rail corridor. Question 3, how close do you live to the nearest grade crossing? Not surprisingly, most of the people at the workshop lived fairly close, less than a mile from the railroad corridor and the grade crossings. We had 6 people who lived more than a mile from the crossing. Question 4, rank the 6 following concerns regarding grade crossings. Traffic disruptions was number 1, followed closely by safety and bicycle and pedestrian access. And Surprisingly, bicycle and pedestrian access seemed to come up a lot more frequently than we expected at the workshop, at the sessions in the afternoon, when we started to talk about problems and measures of success. Lower down on this list, and this is not by any means a scientific survey, noise, community connectivity, and visual impacts. And then finally we asked, this is very important, we wanted to gauge whether the workshop was a success, if we advertised it correctly, if people enjoyed the format, and we'll use these results to shape future community workshops and to shape our outreach procedures ramping up to the workshops. So we asked, did you find today's workshop useful? An overwhelming majority found it useful, either very useful or somewhat useful. That's a positive sign for us. I think we were able to keep people relatively engaged. I think if we stretched longer than 4 hours, we might have started to lose interest. And I do think it was important to mix it up and have activities, break up some of the presentations, and have a working lunch in the middle. Then we asked if people would participate in the next workshop, and again, overwhelming number of people said yes. We also asked if people would prefer a different day of the week or a different time, and nobody answered affirmatively to that response.
It is worth noting this was done at the end of the meeting.
Yes. Yeah. It is. Yeah. We also asked the best ways to keep you engaged in connecting Palo Alto. Most people prefer email updates or email newsletters as well as a website. Not very many people want phone calls, which is not surprising. Question 4, how often would you like to be contacted with updates? A lot of people said monthly, some said bi-weekly. I thought going into it, the majority would say only at key milestones, but it seems like people do want to be kept abreast on a more regular basis. So then in the afternoon, we had some breakout sessions. We asked people, what are the current problems around the existing grade crossings? And we had different topics: bikes, pedestrians, automobiles, noise, safety, visual aesthetics, and then other. So this is a table that shows, we asked people to place dots on a matrix that had the grade crossings along the top and then different issues along the left side and the left axis. Some of these results were a little bit surprising, but bikes and peds ranked very high at Churchill Avenue and Meadow, which is not surprising. Automobiles seemed to rank higher at Charleston Road, which is a little bit interesting to us. It is a key corridor that travels across the entire width of the city, so I think motorists see it as a very important connection, more so than Churchill and Meadow. And Meadow, of course, connects directly to several schools, as does Churchill Avenue, so I think the bike ped focus on those is pretty consistent with what we've thought going in. Safety also ranked very high across the board. It did not rank high for the existing grade separations. We also asked people of their opinion on the existing grade separations, so Oregon Expressway, University Avenue, San Antonio Road. For those, bikes, peds also ranked high, as well as automobile circulation. The second breakout session focused on defining success. So at the end of the day, when we complete this project, how do we know that we've succeeded? We asked people to try to think a little bit long-term and outside of the traditional way that they may think about these, and not focus on issues and solutions, but instead talk about how we would, measure success and how would we define it ultimately. So some of the results are from this workshop are in the area of bicycle and pedestrians. People thought full separation from other modes would be a measure of success for bicyclists and pedestrians. More intuitive and legible layout and organization of facilities, so easier to follow bicycle and pedestrian routes across the rail corridor. For automobiles, people wanted to reduce queuing, particularly in turning lanes, noise concerns, eliminate horn noise. And then around safety, student safety should be prioritized, especially during the morning and afternoon peaks. And then many people wanted to see a reduction in unsafe driver behavior, so people entering the gate area when the gates are down, trying to beat the gates and, running red lights at some of the intersections. And then finally, visual and aesthetics. The visual design of all grade crossings should address the kind of the feeling of poor connectivity, and then people don't want the grade separations to create additional psychological barriers between the community, which the rail corridor already does in many places. So post-workshop, we're going to compile a comprehensive report that will be delivered to the rail committee. We've already updated the website with all of the meeting materials and the link to the video and audio recording. We have a couple of additional stakeholder interviews to conduct. So at the stakeholder interviews, before the workshop, we asked, one of the final questions was, are there any other people you think we should interview? So we're moving forward with additional interviews based on that. And then finally, we have a couple of items that we want to get your direction on, and there's a table that I handed out.
Where was that?
Did you guys get this table here? I can grab some more.
Oh, okay.
And there are quite a few other decisions we're going to need the rail committee to focus on, but today these are the two key ones that we think came out of the workshop and the stakeholder interviews. And if we don't make a decision on these, it could affect the timetable of the project and affect our ability to complete this work in a timely fashion. Yes, I have one now. So the first kind of decision point today is the timeline for this entire project. Originally, when we scoped the project, and you can see that under staff recommended column, we assumed that the CSS alternatives analysis phase would take 9 months. So starting in May, that would bring us to February of 2018. And that's currently the goal that we're working towards. And then we would begin the CEQA NEPA preliminary design process. That would take an additional 12 months, which means we would have an environmental document and preliminary designs by February of 2019. We are, for all intents and purposes, planning to meet this deadline. However, at during the stakeholder interviews, at a couple of previous rail committee meetings, as well as some of the folks at the workshop, there was some concern about whether this was an artificially imposed deadline, if it was realistic to think we could complete the alternatives analysis process in 9 months. And you'll see there an alternative proposal would be to establish a 12-month schedule for the context-sensitive solutions analysis. That would put us to May 2018, and then the CEQA NEPA preliminary design would be completed in May of 2019. This would delay the process by 3 months, and it could, this is not for sure by any means, but it could potentially lead to additional delays in securing Measure B funding, depending on how the cash flow works out from the VTA perspective, where the other communities are positioned in regard to where we are positioned schedule-wise. So we're not saying that's an affirmative impact, but it could potentially be one impact of pushing the schedule out 3 months.
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
Could you, I forgot to bring this up when we were going over this. Can you talk about what happens when we get to the end of the CEQA NEPA preliminary design process, right? So we have that. But I mean, I think, one of the things we're really pointing toward is for the city council to adopt the preferred alternatives, right? And so, what would typically be the time frame between the completion of this preliminary design and that action being able to take place?
So at the end of the CSS alternatives analysis process, we would bring a preferred alternative forward to City Council, and City Council would adopt that preferred alternative. Kind of concurrently with the end of that work, we would begin the environmental process. And the preliminary design would be used to inform the environmental document. And ultimately, at the end of the completion of the environmental document, Council would have to certify the EIR if it turns out to be an EIR, which is probably pretty likely. And then we would hope to move, immediately into final design. And the Measure B funding will actually be available for planning and design work. So ideally, we would be able to access some Measure B funding and move directly into final design for one or several grade crossings.
So just to clarify then, the completion dates on the CSS alternatives analysis presumes then that that's when the council identifies for the community what the preferred alternative is.
Yes, that's correct.
And right now, the schedule assumes that they would do that pretty quickly once we got to, say, February or May 2018.
Yeah, I think we've assumed by the end of this year, we would have a feel for what our preferred alternative is, but it would take a couple months to bring it to council.
All right. Thank you.
And then the second key decision point today is whether to form a citizen advisory committee or not. We talked earlier about the technical advisory committee that we've started to convene. A citizen advisory committee would be an additional committee that would be formed to help facilitate this process. Our staff recommendation today is to continue forward on the path that we've established to date, which is key decisions for the CSS alternatives analysis would be vetted at community workshops. The community workshops would essentially function as a citizen sounding board for key decisions through the process. After those decisions are vetted at community workshops, they would be brought to the rail committee, which would make a recommendation to city council. One thing we think, would be helpful is for the rail committee to regularly invite key stakeholders. So if there are citizens who are highly active and want to participate in the process, the rail committee could establish a framework where these citizens are brought to the rail committee to help facilitate some of the discussions and the decision-making process. The alternative under the alternative column would be for the CAC to appoint, the city council to appoint a CAC, and the CAC would make recommendations to the rail committee, and then the rail committee would make recommendations to the city council. The impacts of convening a CAC would likely be a $50,000 hit to the project budget. We did not anticipate convening two committees under this scope of work. So in the scope of work, we have the convening a rail technical group. We did not include convening a citizen advisory group. So we're estimating that would be an additional $50,000 to facilitate the citizen advisory group meetings, the process, prepare materials for them, and all the other work associated with that, as well as additional staff costs and staff time. The second impact is that it would likely delay the CSS alternatives analysis process by up to 3 months. In all likelihood, we would not be able to seat a citizen advisory committee until August at the earliest, and that would push our schedule back pretty substantially. And it could be longer than 3 months depending on how quickly the appointment process worked. So those are the two key decisions, and we are looking for direction on these today from you if possible.
Thank you. Could I just add something, Mr. Chair? Josh, I actually think the delay with the CAC would be a minimum of 3 months is what our thinking is. I mean, that's the sort of go through the process, seat, and appoint. And then the management of that process, I mean, that could easily increase the period of time that we're involved in. And I just want to say two things before you guys get into your discussion. And I think it's appropriate since the NBA finals are on right now. I mean, I do think that clock management is important in this process, and we need to be paying attention to that. It's because it really does factor into actually building the improvements we want and dealing with the cash flows and the fact that the rest of the world, I mean, we're in a dynamic environment where other players are moving ahead, and we're not doing this in isolation. So I just think we need to think about that. And then secondly, I just would say that, our thought was really that, I mean, the most important thing for the rail committee to do is to make this, I mean, ultimately make this recommendation to the city council, right, on what the grade separation, design, strategy, all of those things are. And why wouldn't the rail committee really take on the task of, in a sense, the CAC, and be able to invite and engage with the public, but really put that burden back on the committee as the way to manage as crisply as possible the decision-making process. That was our thinking. The last thing I just would say is I know that Dick's probably going to speak here, but you know, we're not opposed to advisory committees, honestly, at all. I just would say that, you know, one of the sayings is, you know, one of the things that managers always do is reorganize because it's the only thing they can do. And, you know, sometimes, you know, the default to appointing a citizens advisory committee is sometimes in that same vein. It's like, well, we don't know what else to do, so let's go ahead and do that. So I do think that since time is also a key factor, and yet you want as much engagement as possible, you want buy-in, you want the benefit of the great thinking in our community. I really think you should think really long and hard about the rail committee really playing maybe even a little bit of a different role than committees typically do. Thanks.
Okay, so some members of the public. First speaker is Herb Borak. Second speaker is Nadia Nayak.
It seems that from attending these meetings and trying to listen to what committee members and staff are saying is that you've already made a decision to do some kind of grade separation project, and you want to do it in a hurry because there's some money available from the county Measure B money. But this does require environmental review, and it's properly part of the environmental review as a mitigation for the two main projects that have been going on, which is first Caltrain and then high-speed rail. Now, you passed up on the opportunity of getting Caltrain to be paying for these grade separations as part of their electrification project, because you seem to think that electrifying Caltrain rather than having some other way of modifying it was so important to do that you essentially said, that's a great project and we don't have to be worried about those things. Now, in terms of high-speed rail, it's important while you're spending time on what's the right process to do it, to find out what high-speed rail is thinking about. KCRA.com had an article 5 days ago online in which it said that high-speed rail wants to see 12 trains running each hour along routes in the Bay Area of Southern California. Now, those 12 trains, it doesn't say whether they're all going to go between San Francisco and San Jose, whether those trains are only going to go as far as San Jose, but if they're coming up this corridor, Jeff Morale said that we don't anticipate initially having that many trains, but that's the capacity we're building to. And service will depend upon demand, and it could be, every 15 minutes having a train. So the point is that to try and do this separately and before the high-speed rail EIR process goes through for the San Francisco to San Jose section doesn't make sense, because you don't know what you're designing for, and you don't have a way to get high-speed rail to pay for it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nadia Naik. So I'm sure it'll be no surprise that I would say I'm in column B of looking at having a citizen advisory committee, or actually, let's not call it that. I just think there needs to be a better conversation. I think we keep getting caught up in terminology. But let me play this out for you in super fast mode. So, okay, Rail Committee is now this super empowered committee. You guys get to make all the decisions. You work with staff. You're super fast. You get to do some check-ins with CARD. You do some check-ins with Friends of Caltrain. That's fine. But I know already, because several council members have talked to me about it, nobody wants to be the council member on council that says, we're going to raise or lower the road and take homes. So there goes that alternative. Then you've got the crew that says, well, tunnels are very expensive, we can't afford a trench, so guess where that leaves us? That leaves you with an elevated rail. So you're having this conversation about catenary poles and this other stuff, and you're just going to find yourselves in the same spot. So now you speed through everything, you've brought forth this conclusion, and you're going to be voting on something, and you're just going to go back to 2009 where everybody flips out again. I mean, I think it's interesting that you've got, Josh was sort of surprised by the number of people that came. I wasn't surprised. And in fact, if you listen really closely to what you heard they're talking about bike safety people. They want the things to feel intuitive. They're looking at psychological boundaries. They're asking to be communicated with bi-weekly or monthly. I mean, I get that this is a hyper-engaged group that spent 4 hours on a Saturday talking about rail, but it's not unlike what we heard before. I see this very much like the library campaign. You can go out and do a library campaign. It'll fail. If you spend the time with the community, you might end up with something that they can back. And odds are Palo Alto is going to have to put money into this project. And the odds are that in order to bring those people along, you're going to have to bring in the masses. This is not about checking in with the most annoying residents that have some opinion on this. You're going to have to bring a lot of people along. And community vetting at these meetings is tough. You saw it took 49 minutes, because I measured, before the first person stood up and said, I have a problem with that data. What does that number mean? So if you think that every time you're going to be able to come back with your thing and show it to people and expect that they're going to get it all, a lot of the CSS process is the psychological process of people mourning the loss of alternatives that they can't have, that we can't afford, that are not technically feasible, that just are not going to work for expediency or money. Like, you have to walk them through. And I get that it's painful. And I know for you guys who do this all the time, it's like nails on a chalkboard. But honestly, it's a big deal. This is one of the biggest things that's going to happen from an infrastructure standpoint. And this timeline, I mean, yeah, the numbers are off. You're talking about potentially 4 grade steps. I don't think you're going to be able to build 4 grade steps at the same time. But if you did a great process, you might actually do what San Francisco did, which basically said, we're doing Transbay Terminal. We don't know when the money's coming, but we're building it. What you want is to have the community process where you're able to lock into the comp plan. Yes, we're going to have future grade steps, and yes, we're going to do them this way, and we went through this whole process and we've decided what they are, and we'll figure out how to fund it over time. But you got to bring the people through the process. You can't, 4 hours at this meeting. I mean, essentially, we repeated what the Rail Committee report did in 2014. They all said, yeah, we need grade steps. Yeah, we care about the community. Yeah, we need permeability across the membrane of the rail line. So, I get that these, stakeholder groups and whatever, they can be cumbersome, all of that stuff. But it's messy. But you're going to have to. I don't think you can get through this without that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we'll take it to the committee. Yeah.
So, a couple of things. I actually got to say that I thought the surveys on this were really helpful. And I'm impressed with how many people actually attended. 180 people. 30. I mean, and they all seem really engaged. And I was really amazed when I look at this that it says, 95% of them say, count me in for future. Yeah, sure. 95 say, count me in for future events. 0% basically said, that no, they're not interested. And that actually no one else said they wanted a different day of the week. I thought that was really interesting. And only 5%, sort of, that's 2 people basically, I think, right? Or maybe a little less, said that they didn't want, they weren't going to come again, but they wanted to be kept posted. And I thought to get 132 people fully engaged like that was great. And so when we talk about going out to the community and we talk about involving the greatest number of people, I get the sense that this group's going to stick with these workshops. And so what we're really doing is having a citizens advisory committee with everybody who wants to participate, which seems like 130 people. You can't have a small, a citizens advisory group would actually be less, would be less inclusive, less involving of the community than doing this, because you'll have less number of people. And I think our original fear that some people were going to show up and then not go to the next one, and that this survey seems to indicate the opposite's going to happen. That they're going to be engaged, they're going to go to them as long as, most people are going to continue to show up It's going to be a continuous group, and it's going to be a large group, which is what you want in the community. So I don't think we need the Citizens Advisory Committee. I think this works really well, and we should go with this process. I do think if we were to stop and form a Citizens Advisory Committee, it would slow the entire process down. And in some ways, it would be betraying all the people, the 130 people who aren't on those people who don't get on the Citizens Advisory Committee would then feel like they're not as involved, and they would want to be. And this would undercut the process of these community meetings that we're having. So I actually think it would be a negative in terms of bringing people along and the community. And I am also concerned that I think the city manager is right, that if we form a Citizens Advisory Committee, it's at least a 6 months delay. And then I believe the committee, as most of these committees do, will want more time. So there's the time in seating them. There's the time that they will want more time to continue the process. And I think it'll just drag on and on. Now, the difference, so I'm not going to support a Citizens Advisory Committee. On the delay process of 9 months versus 12 months, I guess I didn't hear a reason of what we gained for the other 3 months and what that would add to the process. I mean, my belief at the moment, I'm open to it, is that we should stick with the 9 months, and that I don't think I've ever been through a process that doesn't get delayed, and that we'll say 9 months and it will be 12 months. But if we say 12 months, it'll be 15 or 16 months. If we say 15 or 16 months, it'll be 19 months. Because these things always have a way of, there's always an extra meeting we decide we need. There's always more information. There's always several more meetings that need to take place. So I would stick with this unless staff says no. I mean, I'm going to defer to you guys. If you think an extra 3 months gets us something by saying it on the front end, I'm open to it, but on the whole, I think we should stick with it.
So the 9-month period is what we thought, that is as aggressive as we felt comfortable being, given the work that needs to occur, the analysis and the decision points. Any shorter than that, and I don't think we'd be able to complete the work in time.
Shorter.
So that's where the 9 months. That's where the 9 months came from.
Right.
An additional 3 months. One of the whole points of a community engagement process is to allow the most number of people to find out about the project and voice their opinion on the project, and ensure that we aren't missing out on opportunities to garner input from the public. So the additional 3 months would give us more time to get the word out. But I think, our approach would be a fairly aggressive community engagement, as you saw with the 130 people that turned out on Saturday. So I think we'd have to be careful if we were going to stick with the 9-month schedule to make sure we get the word out at a level that would hopefully exceed what we would do if we had the 12-month schedule, and still, have as many people involved, just a shorter time frame.
So Josh, not to put you on the spot, but I thought I wasn't quite clear. I mean, I'm more than open to a 12-month process if you think that's better. I think we're going to end up there anyway, frankly. I'm concerned, though, that if we start off with a 12-month process, we end up with a 15-month process. So, I mean, I guess I'm asking, if you want to go forward today with a 12-month process, I think you should say so, if you think it's preferable. If you think it's better to say, let's look at 9 months and let's revise it as we go through, that's another alternative. If you say, let's 9 months is adequate, which is not really what I heard you say. So I guess I want you to be.
So we are recommending sticking with the 9-month schedule. However, during some of the stakeholder interviews and at the workshop, there were some concerns expressed that felt rushed. And this was by community stakeholders. So I think sticking with the 9-month schedule might lead to some comments that were artificially rushing the process. But I think 9 months is, to start at 9 months is a realistic schedule. And I think it anticipates the work that we need to do. I do think we may end up having to have an extra meeting in there, extra meeting or two. So we may end up, exactly as you said, stretching out to 12. But I think our goal should be the 9-month time frame.
So I agree with virtually everything that Nadia said. This is one of the most important decisions that this council is going to make, or and the community is going to make, and that it's going to take a lot of engagement. I don't want us to sound like on the staff side we're saying we're against a citizen advisory committee. What we are suggesting is there are many channels and approaches to use for citizen engagement. I've been doing this for 30 years, and getting clear about what the goals of engagement are. There's everything from informing to actual decision making, and a whole continuum there, and getting clear about what we want to do. And even a large advisory committee isn't representative of the entire community, no matter what we think, particularly when you're ultimately, I agree, thinking about how you may get eventual political buy-in on, say, some sort of funding measure that the city may have to put in. So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to take place. And then lastly, the only place I disagree with what Nadia was saying, I think a little bit, is whatever happens still has to come back to the city council. So that it has to be palatable, acceptable, ultimately to the council, and it is not just default in a very controversial decision that an advisory group is able to perfectly craft that so that that's going to work. Now, that being said, I want to reemphasize our recommendation anticipates that there would be a supercharged role for the rail committee, and that we should look and investigate at myriad ways of engagement. Just as one example, we've got a great resource right over at Stanford at the Center for Deliberative Democracy and James Fishkin. They do a weekend workshop. It's involve over 100 people. It's all based on deliberative polling, which deals with the facts that many people poll. Many polls are by uninformed folks on really what the facts and the choices are. And there's some very interesting work that they've done over there where actually in the course of a weekend you can often move positions 25 points in polling with a kind of point, counterpoint, export discussion, work group things. That's very different than what we even did at the first workshop, which was mostly sort of informing or re-informing folks, it was a necessary first step since there had been a big gap since we'd been out with the public. I think that there are 10 different ways we need to be thinking about the engagement process rather than just delegating, in a sense, to a citizens advisory committee that even as good as they are on controversial decisions, they still become insiders, in a sense, to the process and no longer outsiders. And what we want to do is think about how we continually engage as wide a swath of people. So I think that means we've got to do some real strategic thinking at the rail committee in whatever we do. And if you decide you want, and I think there are a lot of variations of what could be, how you could have ongoing participation versus episodic by key stakeholders. Anyway, I'm just worried we'll default to what we have typically done, that's all.
Yep.
Thank you. So I actually just want to start talking about the session. Thank you guys very much for hosting it. I think it was helpful to kind of explain to folks what's going on. There were a lot of interested parties, and that was nice to see. Just a few comments about that workshop before we get to kind of these alternatives here. So a few things struck me. So one, and it's something I think Nadia mentioned, is this psychological factor. There's a lot of emotions around this, and I think there's actually a good story to be woven for Palo Alto about reconnecting our community, east-west connections. So there's something there that we could emphasize more, and I think is really helpful. It's also the reason this is such a momentous decision is we're going to be, doing this massive project and really changing the face of Palo Alto. So that's a big psychological issue too. Something else that struck me from the session is that I wasn't expecting this. I was kind of expecting to go in and have everybody think that each of the crossings should be perfect. They should be completely separated and all the modes separated, and we just kind of chunk through and do this massive project on each one. It was really interesting to me that I thought the public kind of got the nuance of each one's. That I spoke to a few people who said, well, why don't we just close Churchill? right? Like just make it for bikes and peds. And then other folks were saying, oh, Charleston's much more car oriented. Maybe we don't focus on the bike and ped there as much. So that was really interesting to me, just to see that the public even recognize there's going to be different solutions at each of these different sites. On the alternatives here, I think we have kind of two parallel issues. One is that we as a council and a community do want to make a choice on our preferred alternative so we can actually get in the pipeline and get some Measure B funding and actually begin to solve this problem. The other factor is that we want community buy-in for it. And we want to make sure people are prepared and informed. So I think Jim's question is really good, is what are we looking for in our engagement? Is it informing folks? Is it getting their opinions? And is the ongoing sessions good enough for that? Something that I'm keep on coming back to is the PTC. We do have this Planning and Transportation Commission. And that might be another good sounding board to include here. I think if staff is recommending 9 months, I'm okay with that. I'm a little wary on the CAC, but I want to hear from the rest of my colleagues beyond the mayor. Those are just some of my thoughts for now. And then just the only other thing, I guess, is as we're doing this, and let's say in a best case scenario, we have a preferred alternative that this committee takes to council in 9 months, right? So next February or so, we're going to council and we're saying we like these ones. Is there any financial and funding legwork we can do in the interim? Even if we don't know what those preferred alternatives are, can we begin putting together what our plan might be? And this kind of harks to the library bond measure a bit, in that maybe the groundwork is on the funding side as well as it is on the alternative side. So those are just some of my thoughts for the moment, but I am interested in hearing from other council members on the CAC here. And just a reminder, we did just close down one CAC on Monday night.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Yeah. Well, I think you got a point. Now we've got space for a CAC now. That, right? Not just kidding. Right? You know, I mean, maybe this is overly simplistic thinking, right? But it seems to me that, you know, what we have before us, I mean, it's complicated in some ways, but it's not complicated in others, right? I mean, the first question is, do we really need to do this, right? Okay, and, you know, assuming the answer is yes, then I think as we roll our sleeves up and get into this, you know, we're going to find that there actually is not a huge number of options, right? I think it's going to boil down to a very small number of likely options, maybe even just two. Okay, and if it comes to two, it's going to be, I mean, it's going to be one that's really painful and one that's really expensive, and that's what we're going to have to choose between as a city, right? And so the question is, you know, that's going to, I mean, that's going to take some soul searching by the community on how we do that, right? Right? Is a CAC, I mean, if it comes down to that kind of a choice, is the CAC the best way to help the community understand that and resolve it? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, you know, it's a different problem than the comp plan, for example, that we're just talking about. I mean, I don't know how it's going to play out, but, you know, here's an example. If we're faced with a choice like that, which I think is pretty likely, I think we all think is pretty likely, you know, and we choose a painful option, it's because we couldn't afford, okay, the less painful one. We couldn't find the money, okay? Is a CAC really going to have a lot of value in persuading the community that we really couldn't find the money? Is that a function of what a CAC is supposed to do? You know, I wonder, okay? So I think that's the thought process that we kind of need to go through on whether we want to do a CAC or what's the best way that, you know, assuming that we're headed for that choice, what's the best way that we as a community can make, you know, a bimodal decision where the alternatives are fairly clearly defined like that, right? I mean, maybe it's more than two, maybe it's three or something like that. But I think that's the kind of way we ought to think about this. It's not sort of a complicated thing.
All right. So I guess I wanted to talk about the workshop first. I think we had 5 elected officials there from parts of the day, not 4. Just a quick note. I think I was the only one that stayed. Maybe Lydia stayed for the afternoon breakout sessions.
You were the 2% that didn't want to.
Yeah. But so I would hope that as part of the committee, that future workshops, we can all stay there all day. I think it's important and educational for us, as well as good to see what the community is saying. People did ask for frequent communication. I think 75% wanted it monthly or more frequently. And right now the schedule has, a workshop every couple of months. So I think that's important to think about. Importance of data correctness came up pretty early. In the morning there was some data shown. I think we had an issue with delays on the rail being shown as 0 seconds because of Alma being there, and the delays were for Alma, not the rail. People in the audience picked up on that right away. I think, we have a educated community. We need to be really careful about the information that we present at these workshops. And I really don't think we should use the SIF data for much more than waking the audience up. Again, less than half the people respond. It's hard to tell what this data really means. If the Stanford kind of thing is more comprehensive, including the people that show up, I think that's good. But, this is some subset of a subset. It's hard to tell what it really means. So the other concern I had was the workshop focused a lot on existing conditions, and I heard a lot of the discussion in the afternoon. People were really talking about existing conditions, and I think we're planning for future conditions. And I don't think the 130 people really fully appreciated that. They were thinking about what they see today, not the 20 or 24 trains an hour. And so I think that's pretty important. And so, thinking about, did this workshop accomplish its goal? It's not clear to me. Again, I don't think we clearly defined the goal as in getting the process started. I do think we got community engagement, which is good. There were a lot of questions at the end of the day from the participants about continued engagement and how that was going to happen. And so my sense is that workshops are great for information sharing, but not decision making, right? And I think people that go there, at the end of the day, they've given input, but they don't really feel like they've personally, a decision's been made. So going forward, again, I thought, this first workshop we were trying to define the problem that we're trying to solve. What's the goal? I'm not sure we got that clear answer on that. Maybe that'll come in the detailed report from staff. For me, I think we're not just trying to share information. We're trying to determine the best alternative. I really don't think any of us know what that alternative is. I don't think it's as simple as Councilmember Filseth is saying. I think one of the things coming out of the workshop was that there could be different solutions for the different separations. People seem very open to a variety of things. And so, if the goal is really determine the best alternative that captures kind of all these multifaceted factors to increase connectivity while minimizing these impacts, whether it's homes or construction impacts or whatever it is, and is fundable. And I think either the workshop or stakeholder group is going to have to consider feasibility, right? It's going to have to come in pretty quickly. So kind of moving on to kind of the timeline and the scenarios. I feel like I'm coming at this maybe 180 degrees for where the mayor is, but I think we're agreeing on the high level stuff, and I agree with what the city manager said about clock management. But I continue to think that the workshop process is in the end going to take longer. That I think there's very real risk that we will go through the 9 months and not have community buy-in and end up either restarting the process or extending the process similar to the comp plan and find ourselves in kind of a morass. And I do think that, 3 months, even if it's a little bit longer, is not much of a delay at all. $50,000 is minimal. That we really should think of more of a stakeholder process. And I don't think it's the traditional CAC process. I mean, none of these options is really a CSS process with an empowered stakeholder group. And I think we really need to think about trying the full CSS process with an empowered stakeholder group where the technical stakeholders would provide information and advise that group. But the stakeholder group would actually make the recommendations, and I think they should make them to council. And they can certainly tell us, but I actually don't think it's a CSS process for the rail committee to determine the alternatives. Right? I don't think, we should be taking all this community input and then coming up with our own solutions. And it's going to be big enough that I think the full council is going to want to be involved. The other thing I'd say is, when you look at a workshop process and you talk about 130 people kind of being a CAC, again, I don't think people really. There's no way to make decisions with 130 people, and so we'll get a lot of opinions, but I don't think we'll be able to get the best solution, get the best ideas in a way that that everybody has input, and some of the really important ideas don't get lost in the noise of 130 people. So stakeholders can represent groups of people. I think it could be informal or formal. I think we can continue to have community engagement with workshops. We can encourage people who are really interested, who maybe don't get on a stakeholder group, to ally with a stakeholder, and they can have meetings outside the process and have their voice heard that way. But I kind of strongly feel that we should really try a full CSS process here, and not a typical CAC. I think we've brought it up a couple of times. I mean, can we use the Measure B money for the stuff that we're doing now? I mean, you're saying we can use it for design, but can we use it for this planning, community outreach process? Do we know?
So before I get to the answer for that question, I have a couple comments that I should have made earlier, which just in the interest of clarification, I wouldn't want to assume that the format we used for the first workshop would be the format we would use if the workshops were going to be a decision-making forum. I think we will have to think long and hard about how we most effectively use the workshops to make decisions. The Community Workshop 1 was not intended as a decision-making forum, and there are context-sensitive solution processes which have used the community forum format. Not all CSS processes include a standing appointed committee. And our goal would be to use the community workshops in the most effective manner possible to make decisions. And we would work with, CARD and PPS and some of the other interested parties to help craft the agendas for those workshops and the methods that would be used to make those decisions at the forums. And, it may be that we can't just do them monthly. We need to get more intensive. Maybe the forums need to be organized around the different grade crossings, or I do agree that managing 130 people could be very difficult, and getting them to collectively make a decision could be a heavy lift. But I think there's ways we can look to structure the workshops that would make that easier. And it wouldn't necessarily look like the one that we had on May 20th. In regard to accessing Measure B funding for planning and environmental work and other, project pre-construction work, VTA has said that they're willing to fund some of those activities, but the cash isn't going to start flowing until probably October. And I don't necessarily know that they're going to have all the planning money that we would need available in the first 2-year program of funds. So certainly, we'll look at ways to access that, but I wouldn't want to delay our work waiting for the VTA money to come forward.
Yeah, could it retroactively fund work, things
that would be pretty unlikely. I think it would be for new contracts and new work. We can certainly ask.
Okay. So, yeah, I've been reading up on CSS, and if you have examples of CSS with outstanding committees, I'd love to see them. I really think we should stop calling this the CSS approach from what I've seen, there's a fairly defined methodology, and we're not following it right now. So we can call it community outreach, we can call it something else, but let's not kind of misuse the term. I just want to say, I think if the rail committee chooses the option, that's pretty far from CSS. Council has approved the CSS process, so if we're going to switch, I really think we need to go back to council. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to end up probably going to the community twice for on the ballot. I think we're going to probably have a vote on the preferred scenarios, and then we're probably going to have to vote on funding mechanisms. And again, if we think of it that way, that might impact the way we think about organizing this decision-making process and the community engagement process. So I'll have a motion I'll throw out. I'd love to debate a little bit, so I would recommend to council that we reaffirm our commitment to CSS and engage in a full process with an empowered stakeholder group tasked to define the preferred alternative for grade separations. So, all right.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. I think I've spoken to it. Again, I really think the stakeholder group should be the ones actually empowered to come back with an alternative. And that's a little bit different than, I think, anything we've been talking about here. But, Eric?
I suspect the stakeholder group is going to have to come back with more than one alternative, and much of their work is going to be crafting the details of one of those alternatives more than the other one.
Yeah.
So, I think the stakeholder group's the wrong way to go. I think the staff recommendation is the right way to go. I think that involving the PTC is actually a really good idea. I think that, I just disagree. I don't think it's going to work if we go instead of a stakeholder group right now. I think it will be too insider baseball, as the city manager said. I think people are going to need to be involved as we move through this process, and we're going to need to bring people in as we go through the process, which the community meetings will do. As people start realizing the impacts on their homes, their lives, that they are going to wake up and want to be more involved. So I think we're going to grow from 130 people in these meetings to 200 people, 300 people possibly. And that's a good thing. I think otherwise you'll have a small stakeholder group which will be viewed as insiders. People are going to then, I don't think you're going to gain anything. I do think that Councilmember Fine's suggestion of having discussions of this and input from the Planning and Transportation Commission is actually really helpful. That's another forum where people can go through. It's another set of eyes. It's another group who, frankly, is the group that we've empowered in many ways to do planning and transportation, and is a stakeholder group in their own way in many ways. They represent segments of the community. We as a council appointed them. So I think that, so I actually would make an alternative motion that we go with the staff recommendation, plus that we also send this to the PTC for them to have discussions, make recommendations, and go through the process, and that we empower staff at their discretion to increase the timeline from 9 months to 12 months as they see fit and as they make order.
You're making
Substitution.
I'll second that. So you're saying PTC staff can go up to 3 months?
No, staff can go up to 3 months more. They can look at the schedule and revise it as they see fit.
Just a point of clarification, would the PTC involvement run parallel to the rail committee? Yes. And then it would go to council? Okay.
Well, actually, they would run parallel, but I also think to the extent that they have stuff, they should check in with the rail committee. I mean, it should be the rail committee. It should be PTC, rail committee, council.
I'll defer to Councilmember Phil Seth, and then I'd
Well,
like to make a
I don't know
comment.
if you want to speak to your second.
Yeah, so I think the mayor put it well, that we already do have a body, a stakeholder body that does deal with these things, the Planning and Transportation Commission. I know a number of commissioners have been asking for a big task to do, whether it's on something in housing or transportation, and I think this could be a good opportunity. I also agree with the mayor that, if we do go and set up another body, it will delay this in terms of seating it and in terms of actually executing it. If we all remember the previous CAC for the comp plan, which admittedly is a different project and different task, my council chose to go back and appoint more members, and then, some members dropped out, and then things changed. That can be a bit of a show we don't want. Our goal is to get a preferred alternative, and Councilmember Du Bois, I think you're absolutely right. We do want a context-sensitive solution, but we also have to make it jive with the Palo Alto process. And our problem is not that we don't have enough process. I think that's barely our problem. So I would encourage my fellow council members to support something where we're using an existing body within the city, the PTC. We're giving staff the option to go an extra 3 months. Josh, as you mentioned, it would give you a bit more ability to engage folks and inform people. That may be helpful. I think we do want to be aggressive, but we don't want to come across as being aggressive. So if the 3 months gives you a little flexibility. So that's why I'm supporting this.
Yeah.
If we go with the substitute motion, does that preclude us forming a stakeholder committee later on if we decide it's necessary, just because of the timing involved?
So if could I speak to that, because I'm feeling a little paranoid or defensive here too. I from my point of view, from the staff point of view, it's a false choice, I think, to be talking about 3 or 4 community workshops versus a CAC. I think it's much more multi-textures and approaches, some of which we don't even know what they are yet. Even if we were to say we're going to do CSS, I guarantee you along the way we would say we've got to make some adaptation here and pivot. We have an engaged stakeholder group. Actually, they don't seem to be engaged enough, so we want to do so. We're going to have to do that, because this is, I don't think that this is much about what is the best technical solution. I go back to Councilmember Phil's points. I do think that there are some relatively simple aspects to this that ultimately deal with what is what is technically possible with what is politically isn't the right word, but feasible, acceptable, in such a way that the community say, not only do we accept that, we want that enough that we're willing to pay X amount for. And in one sense, I do think the conversation that says some of these conversations need to unfold in parallel. It's not like we can just do everything sequentially and say, okay, here's a technical thing. Oh, let's take it to the funding folks. Oh, well, that doesn't work. It's going to have to unfold. I actually would just like to say this. I think that this is one of the defining decisions for this community that the council ultimately has to make. I think it's way more important than the comp plan, to be honest with you. The truth is, if we didn't adopt the comp plan, we have an existing comp plan, I'm sorry, that's really pretty good. And the truth is, we're not pulling out the comp plan every week and comparing it to a decision we're going to make. But this decision really is going to set the design, the livability, everything of this community for the next 100 years. And so I think it needs, the council needs to acknowledge that this is a leadership responsibility of the council. That I know the idea of problem definition in any engagement process and doing that is really important. But I think the bigger issue is, how do we get some basic clarity and be able to start communicating clearly enough about what the relative choices are so that the engagement process does grab people. It's not the problem I see with the CAC, I just worry our typical CAC. I've only been with two here: the comp plan and the infrastructure, the iBrick. And then folks talk about the SOFA 2 plan, but even the most supportive advocates for that say it was too long. We could have managed that time better. That ongoing group defaults to folks who have the time, whatever the interest, to be able to hang in there for a long period of time. And that basically excludes everybody else in the city who are too busy to be able to participate. So the bigger issue is, how does the council get enough stakeholder community perspective involvement in addition to what the technical solutions are, that you've got that? And I would imagine we're going to have some stakeholder groups appointed in some way that inform our process. But ultimately, how is it that the community as a whole is going to be able to, the council is going to be able to say the community is going to support us on the ultimate decision we made? And I think that's going to require continual designs. And I definitely do not want anybody to think we just think that just 3 more big community workshops are all we have to do.
Okay. I just want to say these options are not mutually exclusive. I think the PTC and I was assuming we were continuing workshops in my motion. I mean, I think the real question is there a stakeholder group or not, right? I think we do workshops, we send it to the PTC. The comp plan tried the workshop only approach and it failed. It added about 2 years to the schedule. I just feel like we're going down that road again. And what the city manager just said, that we'll probably need a stakeholder group. If we're going to need one, I think we need to set it up now so that they're educated, they're up to speed, they're engaged in the process. I really don't see us waiting 6 months and then forming a stakeholder group. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah.
Well, I just want to say, to be honest with you, I do appreciate that Chair Du Bois has been reading CSS a lot. I would be hard pressed to think that if we asked the council to answer 20 questions about CSS, whether or not we could get clarity about that. And so I think one of the challenges we have is defining exactly what it is we are trying to do and then design the tool to meet what that is.
So that was the point I was going to get at. When Councilmember Filseth earlier mentioned he thinks we're going to have to go to the ballot twice on this. Was that you?
I did.
Or, Tom, you did? Thank you. That struck me for a moment that each of those might require their own stakeholder group. Are we being...
Brad has checked on it.
Oh, Brad is?
Yeah, Brad's checked on it. Thank you. He said we're not evacuating.
Yeah.
This is so important, the place will burn down. We won't be here.
That's right.
We're going to appoint someone.
Everyone else out except the rail committee.
We're not leaving till.
So, I guess there's something here that when we reach some of those decision points that Jim's alluding to, we may need to appoint stakeholder groups, right? Whether it's for a bond measure or for a specific decision point. At the current time, we already do have this CSS process, which we laid out, and then I think it was this committee which supported it. It's going through early next year, and I think, as Josh mentioned, we will be refining the workshops to see if there are decision points in them, and if we do want those groups voting on preferred alternatives to give us feedback, that may be a great solution. In the meantime, I still believe the PTC is a standing body that has expertise in this area and would be a good sounding board for community input. I would be happy for the PTC to vote on alternatives and make a recommendation to this committee, and we make a recommendation to council. And in the future, I may be open to starting another stakeholder group if it's necessary for a specific decision point.
Okay, so again, I think we should stop calling it CSS. If we should come up with a new name.
I mean, I'm not so worried about the semantics there.
All right, so let's vote on the alternative motion.
We're on substitute motion.
Substitute motion. Who's in favor? Against? Okay, so it passes on a 3-1. Again, since council has already directed CSS. I think this needs to go to council with the recommendation of the REL committee.
So, Tom, I think we believe this is CSS. I mean, I know you're saying it's not, but we believe it is. That doesn't mean it doesn't go to council.
Yeah.
But you keep saying it, I just want to tell you that I think we're doing CSS.
Yeah. So, again, I don't think it's really an opinion. I think it's a fact-based point. Yeah.
Is the specific item that goes to council that whether to form a stakeholder committee at this time, or CAC at this time or not? Sorry, I just want to clarify my understanding. The specific item that's going to go to council is whether or not to form a CAC at this time. Is that it?
No, I think it's the motion we just passed, which is to use the staff recommended process plus the PTC. And, the bit about increasing the timeline it's needed. I mean, I think that happens naturally anyways, but, yeah.
Well, you could narrow it. We could do the whole discussion in council, or we could have the question just the CAC. I mean, it's up to you.
Well, I think it's what we just voted on, right? That we're not.
That you could.
What do you?
Could narrow. I mean, if you agreed with the other portions of it, that would be. Then we'd have consensus for us. You could put that portion on consent, and we have a whole wide range of discussion. I said it's really up to you how you want to do it, but we could narrow the point of disagreement to whether or not to have a CAC, and then that's what we put on. The rest of it we put on consent, and say that's what we agree. We recommend we do that, and people could pull that if they want to have the whole wide-ranging discussion, or we could limit, the discussion purely to whether or not we have a CAC.
Yeah,
it's really up to you.
I mean, I think it was the whole discussion.
So you want to do the whole discussion?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Just one. Unless our charter allows us to. I don't remember what our charter allows.
Yeah.
One comment, we did recommend that some of this work go to the PTC. It'd be helpful if staff at some point can give us like what that schedule looks like and what decision points PTC will make in sync with our workshops and this committee.
So a couple of things. Not to slow things down. I think getting to the council before the break is going to be difficult given everything we've got. Secondly, I just would express some concern that I think that we have. I think we, as Councilmember Fine said, I mean, a lot of this is semantics. I actually do think, and sort of sorting out semantics actually takes some thinking, like on the staff side, to even write staff report that I think is really reflective, so we don't necessarily set up a false point counterpoint. Or, I mean, I would hate to see we just go and then we'd have a default decision that's just, let's say, made on having a CAC without the right context. I'm sort of playing off on context-sensitive solutions, but understanding what we're trying to do. I mean, this is a really big decision for the process that we're going to use, and I think that articulating that. I mean, regardless of what you had done here today, I felt that we needed to go back as staff and begin to do some deeper work about how to explain what in general we're trying to do. This is almost like a campaign platform language to sort of try to articulate what we're doing, and I'm just worried about us having a discussion that we're not fully ready to have fleshed out enough for the council. I mean, we come back in August, I could see it, because just to even say, one side saying this is context-sensitive solution, this isn't, well, I'd rather us be able to articulate that a little bit better for the whole council. This is this and what that is, and some of our own work and thinking. I mean, I don't think we could do that. That's really by April 27th, and which means it's got to be out the week before. That's 2 weeks from now or whatever. It's just pretty tough.
So I don't see us doing this. I mean, the way I see what we've just done.
Sorry,
I'm
1 week.
I'm going to speak as the mayor now. What I see what we've just done is staff will continue to move forward in the direction they've been moving. We haven't changed any of that because we can't. So they'll go ahead. There's been no decision. In fact, there's been a 3-to-1 recommendation against doing a CAC. So staff will continue to move forward, and we'll probably bring this to council right after the break about whether or not they want to basically put in a CAC and whether or not they want to do, anything else and change in the process. But at this point, the process will move forward the way
I think it's
the way it continues.
much more
to
than
move forward.
semantics. Again, I was advocating for an empowered stakeholder group.
So, but I don't
That
know
wasn't
what that
even a-
means, Tom. I mean,
What's that?
I don't know what that means, and I don't mean that I'm not arguing. To have a clear definition of what that means, I think would be helpful. And I'm not sure that even the committee's making decisions, yes or no, based upon knowing what that means. And that's what I meant. I felt like the staff report that we bring back.
Well, the staff recommendation, was kind of the series of workshops without any CAC. Right?
That says CSS, but I agree, but it says it also says the rail committee makes and invites key stakeholders. I mean, that could be very expansive. I mean, I'm not saying you guys could end up meeting every week. Honestly. And I just think that you need to give us a little time to do a really comprehensive enough staff report so that the whole council can make the decisions about the direction we're going.
But I do think council's been very clear in the past about wanting a CSS process. And again, everything I see says that, you would have a dedicated group that would be getting the information and making decisions along the way. And so if we're not doing that, I think it should come back, in August.
Yeah, we will. We'll come back in August, right? That's what
my
we'll
sense.
target with the mayor.
That makes sense. I just want to make sure that what we're doing right now doesn't slow the process down, and I don't think it should.
Well, I think we'd like to come back with not only the CSS plan, but also the draft problem statement and the evaluation criteria.
Right. No, I think
That way we don't slow down the process. We can do it all at
I think we're totally
once.
empowered to do all of that.
All right, so we move on to interagency communications. Yeah, so we actually have a public speaker for future agendas. So first on interagency communications, I have several things. I don't know if you guys have anything. I'll just jump in.
Jump in.
So the Union Pacific letter that we voted on, I think at our last row meeting, the LPMG group has decided that cities are going to submit individual letters, and those need to get in fairly quickly. So I think we have a draft letter. I think we already voted to recommend that council have the mayor submit that letter. I don't know that it came to council yet, but if we could have that come to council, that letter should go in the next week or two.
Which letter?
This is to Union Pacific to allow a different grade inclines.
I'm not sure that needs, look, if you think it needs to go to council, I don't think it needs to go to council. I think we've had a pretty clear policy on council that we all support that.
Well, our last meeting, we had a motion, we all voted for it to get that letter in.
Right,
to
get
send
that
that to
letter
council.
signed.
Yeah, so it needs
Not
to
to
happen.
go to send it to council, but to get it signed and out. No?
No, we did say,
So you said to go to council?
yeah, I think it
Oh,
could be
okay.
on consent, but
All
I
right,
think
put
we
it on
should get the
consent
letter
then.
out.
I agree.
Yep. And then we had the two public speakers. I wonder if we should ask staff to write a letter capturing our comments for the VTA guidelines on the Measure B funds. And also ask staff to write a letter for Palo Alto input on the Caltrain business plan. And both those things are happening, in the summer here.
Just a comment there. I was thinking, was it Nadia who brought up how the VTA funding is now cheapest option, and that may not be in our best interest. I agree, we probably should get some clarity there, but it does also seem like VTA is changing that guideline meeting to meeting that we see here.
So I'm suggesting a letter from the city of Palo Alto. saying-
Yeah, but do we know what our preference is there? Our preference is, do we get all of the money? Like, is that what we want to go say to VTA, or?
I think the preference is we would get money for our Palo Alto preferred solution, and we would be responsible for, seeking additional funds. So we shouldn't be limited to the lowest cost solution measured by dollars.
Yeah, so I mean, is it stronger if we go right VTA with, Mountain View and Sunnyvale also? So I'm just not sure what the content of that letter would be and what exactly we're asking the VTA in partnership with our next door cities. And then your question about the business plan, I'd also love to have some input there. I just don't feel ready at the moment to.
Yeah,
say
well, I guess
something, but
the idea
that
would
might
be for staff to come
back to us
with a letter.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. I'd support that.
So, do we need to make a motion on that? Jim, Josh?
So in regard to the VTA grade separation program guidelines, originally, if you remember, they included language about keeping the rail corridor at grade and pursuing the most cost-effective solutions. We successfully advocated, along with other communities and stakeholders, for VTA to remove the language around keeping the railroad at grade. We would be going back with additional comments now, asking them to also remove the language about funding cost-effective solutions. I don't know how effective that advocacy would be because they've already backed off the language around keeping the rail corridor at grade. And I'm not clear what the substitute language would be and what we would request to be put into the guidelines.
And we're double checking on the status of the letter regarding the UP and grade. But we can follow up on that, certainly. The letter, we actually thought we had a draft and
Yeah,
it
I
was in the
sent a
works.
draft. I can resend it if you don't have it.
Okay, so yeah, we'll double check, but actually don't think a motion is necessary on that. We can follow up.
So I think we have a public speaker on this, Nadia.
So just going to the agency communications, I wanted to comment on what Josh said. So in general, I think it would make sense for Mountain View and also for Sunnyvale that VTA should not be looking at what is the cheapest alternative. It's not, I don't think it's necessarily a contentious point. I think it's just something that needs to be rewritten. So I think it may not have to be a formal letter. I would encourage it to really come through the tax stuff, but I think you guys could probably set some policy around, look, we're just trying to get whatever our fair share is. And there's no, when they say cheaper than what? Cheaper than, the next person's alternative to whatever else is available in our own city, and who does the analysis on that. So I think it's doable. It may not have to be just a city letter, but it certainly, you guys could decide that your general policy would be to direct staff to continue to work that through the TAC and just make the point that the language of cheapest alternative doesn't need to be that. And from my Friends of Caltrain hat on, I know that that is something that the other cities are already supportive of as well, because it does nobody any good, basically.
So basically, we'd be asking for the city preferred alternative, just kind of, local control.
Our fair share.
Yeah. So are you comfortable with that, Josh?
We can certainly ask for that, but again, we've already gotten them to retract language once, so we'd be going back a second time and asking for an additional retraction.
Though, right?
No, it was in the original language mentioned keeping the railroad crossings at grade and funding cost effective. Okay. So they removed the at grade language and kept the cost effective.
Does it say cost effective or lowest cost?
Cost effective.
And then the last one, the yeah. And to the point about the Caltrain business plan, about kind of Palo Alto as a what do we want to see in that business plan? Is that also something that staff has some ideas on, or that we should advocate for?
So I haven't been tracking that, but certainly sounds like an activity that the city of Palo Alto would want to have a voice on, and so I think we can follow up with Caltrain to find out what's happening with that. Certainly both their expectations on opportunities to weigh in, but also our perspective on their opportunities. So we'll definitely want to, I think, push and be very actively involved.
Okay. All right, let's move on to future agendas. We also have a public speaker on future agendas.
Sorry, guys. So the Caltrain meeting about the business plan is July 6th. So you guys will need to have a meeting soon. And I'm sorry that Jim left, but piggybacking on what he said, if you guys are going into hyper mode of rail committee really being the place where this stuff gets decided, I would point to the SIF data that says that people want to be communicated with at least biweekly or monthly, which means that you guys have now signed yourselves up for a lot more rail committee meetings. I don't see how you're going to have monthly rail committee meetings if you're going to move at the clipped pace that you are intending to move at and be able to move this stuff forward. So I would suggest that you guys make a motion of doing what we had to do back in the heyday of the rail committee, where we had either weekly or biweekly meetings, basically starting as soon as possible. Thanks.
Did staff have anything on future agendas?
Only the outline is previously described.
I would like to see at some point us to go through the work, summarize the work that was done previously. I mean, I know you brought to council what some grade separation stuff would look like, what the rail corridor study said. I do think we should at least have that discussion at the rail committee and bring everyone up to speed about, you know, the stuff that you've presented to council in the past. Doesn't have to be as in detail or whatever, but I do think we have to at least have that background.
So two kind of near-term items that we are looking to bring forward are a summary of previous work that was done, as well as a schedule of where the other communities along the peninsula are, and where we fall on that schedule. And then we'll also have to reopen the discussion on the circulation study and what we're calling the scenarios. And the scenarios would be looking at things at a very high level, like closing Churchill Avenue, keeping Palo Alto Avenue at grade, but making it a quiet zone. These are not alternatives. These are a very high level, you know, what would circulation look like under different scenarios? And that'll feed into the CSS process. So those are some near-term things that'll be coming forward.
So where's the past work on the agenda schedule?
That's something that we, initiated after the community workshop based on the stakeholder interview. So it's not shown on that.
Here. So we have one meeting in 2 weeks, which is June 28th. Do we want to consider after the break, starting in August, meeting by twice a month?
I think we should talk to staff about that. I don't think we should make that decision now.
Well, so how about we ask staff to look at that? So yeah, between now and August, maybe look at updating the schedule with more frequent rail meetings, particularly if we're going to move into decision making.
Yep, no, I agree with you.
Great. All right, any other comments, questions? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.